This is the slave narrative of 83-year-old Polly Colbert. I am now living on the 40-acre farm that the government gave me, and it is just about 3 miles from my old home on Master Holmes Colbert's plantation, where I lived when I was a slave. Lawsy me, times sure have changed since slavery times. Maybe I notice it more since I've been living here all the time, but there are farms around here that I've seen grown timber cleared off of twice in my lifetime. This land was first cleared up and worked by Negroes when they were slaves. After the war, nobody worked it, and it just naturally grew up again, with all sorts of trees. Later, white folks cleared it up again and took grown trees off of it, and nowadays are still cultivating it, but it is most worn out now. Some of it won't even sprout peas. This same land used to grow corn without hardly any work, but it sure won't do it now. I reckon it was on account of the rich land that us Negroes that was owned by Indians didn't have to work so hard as they did in the old states, but I think that Indian masters were just naturally kinder anyway, at least mine was. My mother Liza was owned by the Colbert family, and my father Tony was owned by the Love family. When Master Holmes and Miss Betty Love were married, their fathers gave my father and mother to them as a wedding gift. I was born in Tishomingo, and we moved to the farm on Red River soon after that, and I have been here ever since. I had a sister and a brother, but I ain't seen them since then. My mother died when I was really small, and about a year after that my father died. Master Holmes told us children not to cry, that he and Miss Betsy would take good care of us. They did too. They kept us in the house with them, and looked after you just as well as they could colored children. We slept in a little room close to them, and she and all of them saw that we were covered up well before she went to bed. I guess she got a sight of satisfaction from taking care of us, because she didn't have any babies to care for. Master Holmes and Miss Betsy were real young folks, but Day was pretty well fixed. He owned about 100 acres of land that was cleared and ready for the plow, and a lot that was not in cultivation. He had the woods full of hogs and cows, and he owned 7 or 8 grown slaves and several children. I remember Uncle Shed, Uncle Lige, Aunt Cheney, Aunt Lizzie, and Aunt Susie just as well as if it was yesterday. Master Holmes and Miss Betsy were both half-breed Chickasaw Indians. They had both been away to school somewhere in the States and were well educated. They had 2 children, but they died when they were little. Another little girl was born to them after the war, and she lived to be a grown woman. They sure were fine young folks, and provided well for us. He always had a smokehouse full of mint, lard, sausage, dried beans, peas, corn, potatoes, turnips, and collards banked up for winter. He had plenty of milk and butter for all of us too. Master Holmes always says, a hungry man can't work, and he always saw to it that we had lots to eat. We cooked all sorts of Indian dishes, tomfuller, pashofa, hickory nut grot, tambutta, ash cakes and pound cakes, besides vegetables and meat dishes. Corn, or cornmeal, was used in all the Indian dishes. We made hominy, out of whole grains. Tomfuller was made from beaten corn, and it tasted sort of like hominy. We would take corn and beat it, like in a wooden mortar with a wooden pestle. We would husk it by fanning it, and we would then put it on to cook in a big pot. While it was cooking, we would pick out a lot of hickory nuts, tie them up in a cloth, and beat them a little, and drop them in, and cook for a long time. We called this dish hickory nut grot. When we made pashofa, we beat the corn and cook for a little while, and then we add fresh pork and cook until the meat was done. Tambutta was green corn and fresh meat cooked together and seasoned with tongue or peppergrass. We cooked on the fireplace with the pots hanging over the fire on racks, and then we baked bread and cakes in an oven skillet. We didn't use soda and baking powder. We'd put salt in a mail and scald it with boiling water and make it into pones and bake it. We'd roll these cakes in wet cabbage leaves, and put them in the hot ashes, and bake them. We cooked potatoes and roasted ears that way, also. We sweetened our cakes with molasses, and they were plenty sweet too. There were lots of possums and coons and squirrels, and we nearly always had some of these to eat. We'd parboil the possum or coon, and put it in a pan, and bake him with potatoes around him. We used the broth to baste him, and for gravy. It sure was fine eating them days. I never had much work to do. I helped around the house when I wanted to, and I run errands for Miss Betsy. I liked to do things for her. When I got a little bigger, my brother and I toted cool water to the field for the hands. Don't none of Master Holmes' Negroes work when they were sick. He and all of us saw that they had medicine and a doctor if they needed one. About the only sickness we had was chills and fever. In the old days, we made lots of our own medicine and I still do it yet. We used polecat grease for croup and rheumatism. Dog fennel, butterfly root, and life everlasting boiled and mixed, and made into a syrup will cure pneumonia and pleurisy. Parsley weed, called squirrel physic, boiled into syrup will cure chills and fever. Snake root steeped for a long time and mixed with whiskey will cure chills and fever also. Our clothes were all made of homespun. The women did all the spinning and the weaving, but Miss Betsy cut out all the clothes and helped with the sewing. She learned to sew when she was away at school and she taught all her women to sew. She did all the sewing for the children. Master Holmes bought our shoes and we all had 'em to wear for the winter. We all went barefoot into summer. He kept mighty good teams, and he had 2 fine saddle horses. He and Miss Betsy rode 'em all the time. She would ride with him all over the farm and they would go hunting a lot, too. She could shoot a gun as well as any man. Master Holmes sure did love his wife and children and he was so proud of her. It nearly killed them both to give up the little boy and girl. I never did hear of him taking a drink, and he was kind to everybody, both black and white, and everybody liked him. They had lots of company and they never turned anybody away. We lived about 4 miles from the ferry on Red River on the Texas Road, and lots of travelers stopped at our house. We were allowed to visit the colored folks on the Eastman and Carter plantations that joined our farm. Eastman and Carter were both white men that married Indian wives. They were good to their slaves, too, and let 'em visit us. Old Uncle Caleb Colbert, Uncle Billy Hogan, Reverend John Carr, Reverend Baker, Rev. Hogue, and Old Father Morrow preached for the white folks all the time and we colored folks went to church with them. They had church underbrush arbors and we set off to ourselves, but we could take part in the singing and sometimes a colored person would get happy and pray and shout, but nobody didn't think anything about that. The patrollers was the law, kind of like the policemen now. They sure never did whip one of Master Holmes's Negroes, for he didn't allow it. He didn't whip them himself, and he sure didn't allow anybody else to either. I was afraid of the Ku Kluxers too, and I suspect that Mazer Holmes was one of the leaders if the truth was known. They sure were scary looking. I was scared of the Yankee soldiers. They come by and killed some of our cattle for beef, and took our meat and lard out the smokehouse and they took some corn too. We Nicklets was awful mad. We didn't know anything about them fighting to free us. We didn't especially want to be free, that I know of. Right after the war, I went over to Bloomfield Academy to take care of a little girl, but I went back to Mazer Holmes and Miss Betsy at the end of 2 years to take care of the little girl that was born to them, and I stayed with her until I was about 15. Master Holmes went to Washington as a delegate, for something for the Indians, and he took sick and died, and they buried him there. Poor Miss Betsy nearly grieved herself to death. She stayed on at the farm till her little girl was grown and married. Her Negro men stayed on with her and rented land from her, and they sure raised a sight of truck. Didn't any of her old slaves ever move very far from her, and most of them worked for her till they were too old to work. I left Miss Betsy pretty soon after Master Holmes died, and went back to the academy, stayed 3 years. I married a man that belonged to Master Holmes' cousin. His name was Colbert too. I had a big wedding, Miss Betsy and a lot of white folks come and stayed for dinner. We danced all evening and after supper, we started again and danced all night, and the next day and the next night. We would eat for a while, and then we would dance a while. My husband and I had 9 children, and now I've got 7 grandchildren. My husband has been dead for a long time. My sister Cheney lives here close to me, but her mind has got feeble and she can't recollect as much as I can. I live with my son, and he is mighty good to me. I know I ain't long for this world, but I don't mind, for I have lived a long time, and I'll have a lot of friends in the other world, and I won't be lonesome.
If you would like to listen to more slave narratives, leave a comment stating so. Remember to like, to help the channel. Subscribe and open notifications, so that you can be notified of any new slave narratives that are uploaded to the channel. This slave narrative will end in 3, 2, 1.